Okay, we're going to get started. The message today is called Jesus, the Bread of Truth. Now, just to bring you up to speed, to remind you, this is the day after Jesus fed 5,000 people. And it's the morning after or the same day as the early hours of the morning where he walked on the water. The crowd which had found him the day before couldn't find him because he walked across the lake on the water. Confused, and they began to look for him. And that brings us up to where we are. They find him. They ask him how he got there. And then they have this discussion. Chapter 6, verse 30. So this is the crowd of people, asked him, "What miraculous sign then will you give us that we may see it and believe you? What will you do? Our forefathers ate the manna in the desert, as it is written, He gave them bread from heaven to eat." Jesus said to them, "I tell you the truth, it is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." "Sir," they said, "from now on give us this bread." Then Jesus declared, "I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry, and he who believes in me will never be thirsty." So we have these crowd of people that chase down Jesus. And in case you get excited, like, wow, there's a whole bunch of people here that want to follow Jesus, we see right away that they're on one level with him and he's on another level. The first thing they ask of him when Jesus starts to indicate that he's somebody sent from God is they ask for a miraculous sign. These are the people that saw him yesterday feed 5,000 people with 5 biscuits and 2 fish. But that was yesterday, and I'm hungry again. So let's see you do something else. And the first lesson that we have here is Jesus deliberately is talking about bread the day after he fed 5,000 people with bread. There were 5 biscuits and 2 fish. And I wanted to start with talking about crowd rule. Whether it be popularity or when a crowd goes ugly, a mob. Crowds oscillate. They can be in your favor. You can find yourself in the midst of a whole crowd of people that support you or something you're doing or a cause you're doing. That same crowd can turn around and completely go against your cause. Just like when Jesus rode the donkey into Jerusalem, had the crowd cheering for him, laying down the things, worshiping, and a short time later they were saying, "Crucify him." I've been reading Abraham Lincoln's letters, and he was trying to gain people support for anti-slavery for 20 years before he was president. It was really his lifelong passion. But what he strongly urged somebody in a private letter was that they would not use crowd power or mob rule to accomplish their purposes. He warned against that, trying to do things by force. I probably only have 4 points today, but the first point about this is that men by nature, people, have a herd mentality. Think of a herd of cattle. They think in herds. They move in herds. They go mad in herds. When cattle get disrupted and there's a stampede, they're all crazy. It can all happen at the same time. but they only recover their senses slowly and one at a time. And so if there's a crowd of people that are turning for or against Jesus because it's popular or because they saw a miracle, there's not something there that we ever saw Jesus deliberately try to harness to advance the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is something that happens in each of us one at a time, slowly, as we come to our senses and leave the madness and leave the crowd. But he's dealing with the crowd right now. And so the crowd says to him, "What sign can you do to prove that you're sent from the Father? What will you do? Our forefathers ate manna in the desert. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." They're referring to the fact that manna, which was this heavenly food when the Jews went from Egypt to the promised land, they were miraculously fed. They're using the word he ambiguously, implying that Moses gave the food in the desert. That proved that Moses was somebody who was sent by God. Jesus corrects them about the manna. We're going to talk about manna a little bit later, but Jesus corrects them. That's why in 32, Jesus says to them, "I tell you the truth. It is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven." Jesus is talking about the past, the present, and the future all in one. He's saying past tense, it wasn't Moses that gave the bread from heaven. It was my Father. He's saying, I tell you the truth. Why? Because he saw it. No, it's more than that. It's more than that. He's not just saying, I saw the manna. This came from my Father, not from Moses. How did this conversation start out? The Jews are asking for a sign. Jesus fed 5,000. They want more bread. He then says, I'm not going to show you another sign right now because I am the sign. You see, what he's saying here is in 32, I tell you the truth. It is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives. Gives is present tense. Who gives. Not back when you guys were in slavery and escaped, and like the movie showed and everything, the 10 Commandments. It's my Father who gives the true bread from heaven. What he's saying here is, the Father sent me down from heaven like the manna. I was in heaven, I came down to earth. That's me. I am the sign. I am the true manna. The word true bread in the Greek, the word means literally made of truth. So a bread is made of flour, or a cornbread is made of corn, whatever. This literally, Jesus said, the Father has sent the bread made with truth. That would be me. But they're on a different level with him. You see, you ever have a conversation and you're saying one thing and somebody's on a totally different level? You know? Apples and oranges here, just way off. But the spiritual lesson for us is, when God says something to us, do we hear something different? He tells us one thing, we're on a totally different level. We're not hearing what he's saying. This manna came down every day, and it was fresh. If you tried to save it for the next day, it spoiled and became mildewy, except for on the Sabbath. They were not to collect the food on the Sabbath, so it didn't come down. But guess what? The day before the Sabbath, they could collect 2 days' worth of the manna. And on the Sabbath, it wouldn't spoil. It would last an extra day. Isn't that awesome? Sometimes we just get so tied up at something legitimately that we can't hear from God for something fresh that day. He can make what he gave you yesterday last 2 days. Otherwise, though, you have no excuse. We need that daily bread. Jesus said, give us this day our daily bread. There's a lot of means of what it means. He does literally mean it's okay to ask him for food if you're hungry. But in another way, he's told us, I am the daily bread. It's not a little devotional book. It's me. And if you're not sure about that, John 1:17 says, the law came through Moses, but grace and truth from Jesus Christ. So the bread made of truth, which came from Jesus Christ. When the Father sent down truth, manna, pure manna, he sent it down ultimately in the form of Jesus. You have to think about that Jesus condescends to call himself bread. It's a base food. He doesn't call himself some dainty food, filet mignon, some caviar, some rare food. He calls himself common bread. I suppose, and it's just me that supposes this, that there would be absolutely nothing wrong if Jesus went to an Asian culture and somebody said that he is the rice of life. Or if he went to an Irish culture and he said he is the potato of life. Or if he went to a Native American culture and said he is the corn of life. Or if he went to, I think there's some island somewhere where they live on sweet potatoes. And to say, I am that. The point is that it's not bread made from wheat, a specific kind. That's what Jesus is making the point of. It's in this culture, this is the staple, the commonest food, the most regular thing, something that people would be expected to eat every day. How could the Son of God, God Almighty, just call himself an ordinary piece of bread? Well, in Psalms, he calls himself a worm. When he's being crucified, he says, I am a worm and not a man. So he descends even lower than calling himself bread later on. But for now, it's bread. Not the luxury of refinement, but the staple food of life. Jesus comes in the flesh. That's our bread. Jesus on the cross bleeding, that's our wine. That's our drink. We're going to come back to that because he mentions both being hungry and thirsty. Let's do it right now. Jump down. When he says, I'm the bread of life, he who comes to me will never go hungry, and he who believes in me will never go thirsty. Point number 3. This was something our family had communion together over the weekend. And this just sort of, the Lord just revealed this to me. I've never exactly heard it this way, but he mentions to not be thirsty. He shed his blood so we could shed our sin. The degree in which we are able to shed our sin is proportional to the degree in which he shed his blood. There's a direct correlation. The aorta is the main artery that comes off the heart. There's the heart, and there's the aorta. The Greek word for aorta actually means to hang something or to raise something up or to hold it up. So why did they call that blood vessel that? They didn't know what the aorta did. They didn't even know it had blood in it. They used to think that it had wind in it or air. And what did they think it did? They thought that it held the heart up, like a coat hanger holding a jacket up. That's what the ancient Greeks thought. So when they saw this blood vessel, they called it the hanger, or that which raises up or holds up the heart. It just holds your heart up. That's not at all true. The heart's supported by a lot of things, and everything's put together in there. But then I was just thinking about that it's just like the cross. We think that Jesus hung on the cross. We think that he hung on the cross. We think that the cross held him up there. But we know that it didn't. We know that he was on the cross to shed that blood. We know that it was his love that kept him on there, as the little bumper sticker says. He didn't hang on the cross. He willingly put himself on the cross. That cross was hanging to him. He was the center of the universe. The cross was hanging on him because he commanded it to. He shed his blood so we could shed our sin. So here Jesus is explaining this to them. Verse 34, he says, "From now on, give us this bread." You ever explain something to someone, and after you explain the whole thing, they ask you the question or make a statement that shows that they didn't understand one thing that you're saying? My wife will tell you that she does that to me all the time, but no, I just kidding. But so Jesus in verse 35, he's so patient. He basically, and later he repeats himself again. He just says, "I am the bread of life." Okay, let me just say it to you this way, okay? All this stuff about bread, signs, miracles, Moses, manna, forget it. It's me. It's me. I'm the bread. I'm the bread. He speaks as directly and plainly as can be. The Greek words, "I am the bread." If you look at the Greek, I am, a very simple thing. It's something he says over and over again in the Bible. Bread, a simple word. Just try to understand this. I am the bread of life. I'm the bread of life. And then I think, how could they not understand that? And then it's like, I said the only way he could be misunderstood is perversity, unbelief, or plain old sin, because he spoke so plainly. When people are perverse, when people are biased, when people are filled with sin, you can be as plain as day, this is wrong, and they won't hear it. They won't hear it because they didn't hear it with Jesus. One of my kids had to learn for Sunday school, or Rachel wrote it in one of her books or something. I don't know where I saw it this weekend, but it's a verse in the Bible. "Those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs." Cassia read that from the Bible when we all had our devotional. Whew. I could just sit down right there. You're clinging to the idol. You forfeit the grace that could be yours, which is Jesus. Your stomach's growling, so you're thinking about going to Wendy's instead of being fed by Jesus in your spirit. "He who comes to me will never go hungry, and believes in me will never be thirsty." The word "believes in me" in the Greek means to put all your weight on, to completely trust. The only way I can liken it as a kid is when I used to go play pond hockey. And you would go out there and you would basically either have my father or the heaviest kid, which was always this kid Glenn, would go on the ice. And if he didn't fall in, then I would go on, because I weighed less than him. But ultimately, you have to trust the ice to either hold you or not. I'm standing up here without thinking about it. You're trusting those chairs, and I'm trusting this board that's probably 100 years old to hold me. What good is a half of $100 bill? Do you have $50? Nothing. You have nothing. What good is trusting Christ halfway? You don't have half of him. You have none of him. He also says, fourth point, He does not say, believing in me is like eating. He doesn't say it's like that. He says, believing in me is eating. It is eating. It is drinking. I'm not just being metaphorical. There's something that happens. So I'm like, what is this? What do? You take a piece of food, you put it in your mouth, you chew it. Mastication, right? Where you chew and your muscles. Digestion starts in the mouth. It becomes a bolus. You swallow it. It's an ADL, an activity of daily living is what the nurses call it. It's something that someone needs to do to be able to be independent, or a child needs to be able to do. Every house has a kitchen. If you go to a 2-room house, there's a kitchen in there. There's always a place for bread. There's obviously some foreshadowing of communion here. The bread, the wine, it's just all over this. But I just don't have time to get into that. I can say this, that when you eat, it brings people together. People get together to eat is one of the most common things we do. Jesus can bring people together and bring peace. There's pretty much nothing else that will bring people together. I mean, maybe like women will go to the bathroom together, but not men, you know? I mean, there's just nothing that will bring men and women together but food. I can't remember the name of the bird, but it's the ones that are always standing on one legs that look like toothpicks. What? Flamingos. But they're orange because they eat shrimp that's orange. If you don't believe it, go to the Stoneham Zoo. It's right up on the sign there. That's why they're orange. And there are silkworms that have a silk color. The color of the silk thread is the color of the leaves that they've been eating. What's the point? The point is that when you eat bread, you ultimately assimilate it. Non-SAT word, you are what you eat. It becomes part of you. Think about it. You put bread in your body, you eat it, it becomes part of you. Jesus says, you must receive me. You must chew me. You must swallow me. You must assimilate me. I must be inside of you. I must be inside of you, and then I will be assimilated with you. You will die and I will live, but you will still be you somehow. That's why he said, I am the bread. That's why he didn't say, I'm like the bread. You know, you can imagine somebody that says they love bread. They study bread. Maybe they study digestion. Maybe they go and write books on it and do studies on it. And you look at them and they're starving. But they go to places and tell everybody how much they love bread. They're experts on all the nutrients that are in bread, the history of bread, how you can make bread, what kinds of bread you can make. Of course, what am I driving at here? Bread is only useful when you eat it. Jesus is only useful when you receive him. He is of no use to anyone. It also, to me, means it's not our own works. You can't earn your way into this bread saying, okay, now you deserve me. You have to take the piece of bread, receive it, and put it in your mouth and eat it. I can remember when I was a kid, they had a Pepsi challenge. And the Pepsi challenge was that Pepsi was getting killed by Coke. But Pepsi felt that it tasted better than Coke if people didn't know it was Coke. So they went around and literally, I don't know if Marie remembers this, they would have stands all over the place. None of the rest of you guys were born, but Pepsi supposedly said that they sponsored it, but they said that they won, that there were more people that chose Pepsi over Coke. It was definitely a successful advertising campaign because they don't care if you talk about me, just talk about me. It's kind of like Hollywood. But we know the old expression for Coke, right? What was Coke called? The real thing. The real thing. And Coke is still number one after 25 years. Pepsi's always been number two. And this isn't a lesson about Pepsi versus Coke. The lesson that God gave me, and this is my final point, I have 2 minutes, is that the Jews used to say that the tradition said that the manna for people, when they ate in the desert all the time, manna, when people asked them what it tasted like, that for every person, it tasted like just what they liked. Just what they needed. This isn't in the Bible, this is tradition. But there's a spiritual lesson in this. If the manna tasted just like what they like and just like what they need, what is that saying? That's saying Jesus is that way. For my wife, he's a hot drink, and for me, he's a cold drink. You see? For one person, he's banana bread. For somebody else, he's this other kind of bread. I'm not trying to be flip about this. He used this very simple word, bread, as who he was. And so what I would say is, if you ask me what kind of bread he is, besides the bread made of truth, all I could tell you is that it is the sufficient bread that has a sweetness all its own, perfectly fit for you, suitable for the wilderness as manna was, suitable for our daily needs. Taste and see that the Lord is good.